had a feeling that was going to be a little too long to do a full review over, and I was going to lose my mind. I mean, how many times can I say the fat man is stupid? You know? So I guess it maybe would be better to try to do a history lesson on Santa Claus. Yes. And then if we are still feeling energetic, we can do a fiction review. And then we'll call it good. But that's up to you. So
he's got a feeling.
I've got a feeling. And hopefully this actually gives the history of Saint Nick and not Santa Claus, and I picked the right video. Because I know Ryna Reeves has history on the actual guy. I just hope I picked the right one. So we'll see. All right, so here we go. We are going to cover the real history of Saint Nick, if this is the right video. In which case, if it's not, you're going to have to cover for me while I find the right one. But anyway, here we go.
I'm covering.
You sit on a throne of lies.
That would be Santa
I thought
Claus.
I was done talking about folk history and holidays, at least for a little while. But then my boys asked me to make a video about where Santa Claus comes from. They're at the age where they find history a bit more interesting. Not as interesting as Minecraft, but still interesting. Now, I have 2 other videos, older videos, on Christmas that I will link in the description.
Those are the ones I watched.
One is on the history of Christmas presents. The other is on the story of the song Silent Night. This topic, though, is on the age-old question, where does Santa Claus come from? It's actually a harder question for people to find out on their own. Some of you may be aware that there was a bishop in the 4th century named St. Nicholas, but it's unclear how he got reindeer and started breaking into your houses to deliver presents. Some are even suspicious of Santa, thinking he's some sort of secular plot to remove the true meaning of Christmas from the Nativity. I've had at least one educated...
Don't laugh at my conspiracy theory. That's exactly what's going on. Don't make fun of me.
...man tell me, to my face, that Santa is just the name for Satan scrambled up to hide the devilish origin.
They made a movie with Jack Black about that not too long ago. I haven't seen it yet, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people are like, oh, it's from the devil, and yeah, don't watch it.
Yeah. It's like, guys, it's okay. I mean, if Satan really was being equivocated with Santa Claus, I'm sure the devil is embarrassed about it.
Just pray before you watch it, and you'll be all right.
There you go.
Well, there's a lot of good information out there on the history of Santa, but it's not easily accessible. At least there is nothing immediately available in this kind of format. There are scholars of all stripes, religious and secular, who have pieced together much of this story that I'm about to tell you. But if you've watched some of my recent videos, especially on Halloween, you're already probably prepared for what I'm about to tell you. Santa and Christmas are Catholic traditions that get altered, changed, and secularized by Protestants after the Reformation. There is almost no connection to the Roman practice of Saturnalia or to the god Odin, though you'll often hear those claims in pop culture. Credentialed historians are agreed on that point, by the way, though a Google search or Wikipedia can make it sound like the jury's still out. Neither the Romans nor the Norse had anything that approached the idea of Christmas or Santa, though now, of course, the number of things said to be originally part of Saturnalia is comically large and mostly historically false.
We just watched that in the previous video.
We did, didn't we?
Yeah, at the very beginning, they were saying as part of Saturnalia, Romans were, equivocating gifts of taxes or something.
So is this guy wrong?
No, I think he's right. I would trust this dude. He's really on point when it comes to church history. Just in case you're curious, the guy's channel is Ryna Reeves, and I highly recommend him. He's thorough. You may not agree with everything he says, but he is thorough. And so I would trust this guy over a lot of people. So,
okay.
In fact, as you'll see in a minute, most of what we consider to be quintessentially Christmas and quintessentially part of who Santa is was invented in the 1800s. And the legend and the image of Santa didn't even get fixed until the 1930s. Santa Claus and Christmas, in other words, are new traditions riding on the coattails of older Catholic liturgy. Okay, first, St. Nicholas. We can count on the fingers of one hand what we know about the origins of St. Nicholas. We know he was Greek and from a wealthy family. We know he was Bishop of Myra in modern-day Turkey. He was persecuted under Diocletian just prior to the rise of Constantine, and he may have attended the Council of Nicaea, where the Nicene Creed got its first draft. That's it. At least that's all we know for sure. Even the Catholic Church only formally recognizes these facts as provable for St. Nicholas. And so much of what we consider to be the fuller story of Nicholas comes from the legends and stories written down at a later time. My favorite is the legend that states that as an infant, Nicholas refused to breastfeed on Wednesdays and Fridays, since those are Catholic fast days. I'm sure that's how babies work. But he was certainly famous. We know this because in the area around where he was a bishop, people began to name themselves after him when they were ordained. Stories abound also of St. Nicholas caring for children and giving his wealth away lavishly, which is absolutely where the later stories of him as a giver of gifts to children originates. But he did not go around on December 24th giving gifts to celebrate the birth of Jesus. The most popular...
Now, see, that's what I heard growing up. That's depressing. I kind of thought that was true. Oh, well. That's what I heard, about the guy.
Well, that's what we're all about is, we're finding the truth in things.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Legend is that Nicholas once heard of 3 young girls whose father was old and poor and unable to pay for their dowry to marry. He was on the verge of selling them into, let's just say, a certain kind of slavery that I won't say out loud. Nicholas, the story goes, decided to act and he came to the window of the home at...
If you must.
No, I don't want to.
You don't want to? It rhymes with constitution.
Night.
Constipation?
And on 3
Close.
consecutive nights, dropped a bag of gold into the window to pay the girls' dowries. Now, there's lots of little permutations of that story that go far and wide, but the basics are all kind of there. He gives lavishly, and he does so anonymously, and he is looking out for younger people in need. Now, there is, of course, another legend of St. Nicholas, one that is loved by theology nerds everywhere, and that is the story of St. Nick slapping Arius at the Council of Nicaea. I think it's just the juxtaposition that makes people laugh. Bearded old Santa Claus.
Hey, don't knock it out. You're the one that taught me that one. I never heard of it before these videos. Don't try to distance yourself from it now, buddy. You're the one that spread that. Or one of them.
Spread what?
Slapping.
That St. Nicholas slapped a guy.
I didn't say that.
Ryna Reeves said that. I don't know why I went into a falsetto there, but anyway.
You said... Wait, who slapped who?
St. Nicholas slapped another saint. As the meme says on the shared screen, Mama said knock you out.
Oh. I just missed it. Sorry.
A heretic for denying the divinity of Christ.
Adobe, I will be on you as soon as the live stream is done. Don't sell me an ad. I've already bought you. I don't think I can buy any more from these people. You've already taken my money. Leave me alone.
That's why they're adding.
Yeah.
So they can add to your collection.
Yeah.
Is unverifiable, I'm sorry to say. It really is only written down later in the Middle Ages. It is interesting, though, and it may have been true. This is actually a rare story because it tells a negative story about a popular saint.
That's not a negative story.
Which does give it some measure of veracity.
That's not a negative story. Why is that a negative story? That's awesome. He punched a dude for denying the divinity of Christ. How is that a bad thing?
He should have turned the other cheek.
Bah.
Humbug.
He was spreading misinformation. It's fine.
Oh. I like misinformation.
And no, but...
So does the internet.
It leads to the truth. Misinformation does.
That might actually be a very profound thing you just said. That you meant as an offhanded comment. To get to the truth, you must wade through a pool of lies.
Well, I mean, the way of truth is extremely narrow.
Yep.
Because Jesus is the truth, and his way is extremely narrow.
We're going to have to talk about that Bible verse someday. I don't know if it means what people think it means. But we'll have to look at it.
It means a lot more than what people think it means.
Well, I don't think it's. Well, we don't need to go into that. We'll just be ranting on something completely unrelated. But yeah, that's something we need to circle back to.
All night on the straight and narrow.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll. I don't know if it. I don't know if it just means to not sin. Like, I'm not sold that that's all it's talking about. I don't know.
It's not.
But we'll see. I mean, we'll circle back to that and talk about what it means sometime. But we need to stay focused.
Focus.
This was not how business was conducted at councils. The later story is that Nicholas did this. He slapped Arius, and that he was defrocked and removed from his bishop's seat as a result. So we really don't know what to make of the story at all.
Council was weak. They should have let him keep it. They should have gave him a promotion. But anyway.
You can give him a
happened,
promotion.
maybe it didn't. But, well, the memes are going to live on no matter what. So that's not much to base Santa on. But then something happens in the 11th century. Just on the eve of the Crusades, the bones of St. Nicholas were stolen by a band of Italian merchants and removed to the southern city of Bari in Italy. To this day, in fact, his bones are on display there in the tomb in the Basilica of St. Nicholas. Now, for my money, that's the funnier story. You can go see the bones of Santa Claus in a church in southern Italy. Maybe don't bring the kids.
Why?
But
They'll be
that
fine.
translation, as we call it,
It's
of
haunted.
the bones from modern-day Turkey to Italy brought a new veneration for the stories of St. Nicholas to Europe. And so the story in the West began to grow. Now, it's important to say there is an equally important expansion of the story of St. Nicholas into the regions that will one day be Russia, but I can't go into that. But the Russian Orthodox Church has a long-standing history of veneration of St. Nick, but that veneration does not produce the same story of Santa Claus as we know it today in the West. In Europe, though, two things happen. First, the Feast of the Nativity, that is to say, the commemoration of the birth of Jesus, was established in the early church to fall on December 25th. As I always say, no, they did not think that he was born on that day. No one did, at least in the ancient church. There was an older practice of Saturnalia, as I've already said, that was basically just a bunch of wild parties during the winter solstice. And they were largely over the top and, frankly, as Roman parties tend to be, kind of wild. To use Southern American lingo, it was the last barbecue cookouts before it got too cold and too dark to do much of anything outside until spring. That's really what Saturnalia was at its core. The other thing about Saturnalia is it was a time of kind of upheaving the traditions, the standards, and it was a time of what we would call misrule. And that idea of misrule and partying is what sticks around in European Christmas. So keep that in mind, and I'll come back to it in a minute. But the Feast of the Nativity had nothing to do with giving presents or Christmas trees or St. Nick or any of these things that we call Christmas today. Rather, it was December 6th, the Feast of St. Nicholas himself, that was the day for presents. Those stories of St. Nick giving gifts and being a bishop, weighing your sins and your virtues, was mostly what was in focus on December 6th. It was essentially a childlike version of penance. It was said that he would bring a sack of presents around to those who had been good. But he also, and this is also funny, carried a switch for those who had been naughty. And that is, of course, the origins a bit of Santa's list. You can just see the frazzled mothers of bad kids warning them that Santa is going to whip you when he comes to town. And you thought Elf...
That's quite a nerve-wracking trip to the supermarket, don't you think? Yeah, we're going to go to the mall, and Santa might give you some presents, but he might beat you. It's
Well,
coin
maybe.
toss, really. Just let that hang in the air, nice and awkward.
As long as he doesn't make me pick my own switch.
I don't even... That would be hilarious. Like, have a Christmas tree, but it's dead,
Yeah.
and all the bad kids have to cut the switch before St. Nick beats them mercilessly.
And if the switch breaks, you gotta go get it done.
You gotta pick another one. We're masochists, Trevor.
Well, I mean, that's what... I don't remember who made me do that? Was it Grandma?
I don't know. It was a long-standing tradition.
Yeah.
That's all I guess anybody really needs to know.
Yep.
On the shelf was manipulative. But don't mistake the story. It was more of a playful penance, a liturgical catechizing of kids into the practice of weighing your sins and good deeds in this act of penance on December 6th. In other words, what we consider Santa and Christmas was actually a story that was celebrated on St. Nicholas's Day, December 6th. And the practice was largely, again, a Catholic practice. December 25th, though, was mostly a large season of parties for adults, with a lot of drinking and eating, but nothing of what we consider modern-day Christmas, trees, presents, and jolly old St. Nick. So what happens? Well, quickly, the story is that the Protestant Reformation disrupts a lot of this historic liturgy, and that's across the board. New Protestant nations, Lutherans, Reformed, Anglican, etc., after the 16th century worked very hard to figure out what to keep and what to throw away from the Catholic liturgy. Most of it got purged, even in historically liturgical churches like the Anglicans. So as a result, most Protestant nations found themselves wanting to keep primarily only Easter and Christmas, since those were celebrated in the ancient church and focused on Christ himself and not on the life of a saint. Protestants to this day still celebrate Christmas and Easter, usually. What happened, though, is that people still liked the giving of presents. They missed December 6th, to put it mildly. And so what happened in Protestant nations is you see a kind of creativity, if you want to use that word, in trying to come up with ways to keep the giving of presents without keeping St. Nicholas's Day on December 6th. In Lutheran Germany, for example, they liked the idea of the giving of gifts to kids, but again, they got rid of St. Nick, and they decided instead to have baby Jesus be the one to bring the gifts to the kids. They referred to this as the Christkindl, or the Christ child, and he stood in place of Santa, which is where the name Kris Kringle comes from. I always wondered that as a kid myself. His name is Santa, why is he being called Kris Kringle? But it's actually a morphing of the word Christkindl, which is just baby Jesus bringing the presents instead of St. Nick. In England, a different tradition arose during and long after the Reformation, centered around the figure of Father Christmas. Not Santa, though the resemblance is certainly there for some, but more the embodiment of the Christmas spirit itself, or the merry season. Father Christmas wore green, and he had a long beard, and he sort of presided over the month of December as a reminder to laugh.
Just in case anybody's wondering and hasn't read Charles Dickens, that's the interpretation of Christmas present, Father Christmas.
From the story of A Christmas Carol.
Yep. So that's the origin of that,
story.
apparently. I'm sorry?
I love that story.
It's a good book. It's a good book.
Eat and drink to celebrate the season, as well as to be generous to those around you. For a long portion of English history during and after the Tudors, therefore, there is no mention of St. Nicholas or Catholic tradition, at least not from the royal family or the Anglican Church. Instead, the Christmas season was stretched over the entire month, culminating not only in December 25th, but eventually in Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, on into the new year. Now, Boxing Day is that same move that Protestants do, where they change liturgy into a Protestant practice. The day after Christmas was originally the...
But that's not a bad thing. I don't know why everybody always harps on that like it's a bad thing. The Catholics did that with the pagan holidays. Protestants are doing it to them. It's the same thing. It's like, just... why is morphing stuff around of changing cultures and times bad?
Hold on. Quick question.
Yeah.
I've always kind of like had a problem understanding what's the difference between a Protestant and like a Catholic.
Well, that's a lot of history. So basically, Martin Luther nailed his 99 Thesis. I think it was on the church door or something. And it's basically, he thought the Catholic Church needed a bunch of reforms. And so the church didn't really want to discuss those reforms, so they didn't deal with it too kindly, to paraphrase a bunch of stuff. And Luther wound up going into hiding, and that whole conflict eventually led to a whole new branch of Christianity, Protestantism, which evolved into a bunch of denominations. And the Catholic Church has just kind of been the Catholic Church, from then on. So, that's a huge history. Eric Metaxas has a book called Martin Luther. If you want to learn kind of the details of all that, you can go check out his book. It's pretty good. Okay. So, that's pretty much it. So the Protestants broke away from the Catholic Church, and there was a big handful of conflicts in Europe over the years, to put it mildly. But that's the big thing. So, yep.
Feast of St. Stephen.
Thank you.
Now it's Boxing Day and non-liturgical. Until the 1800s, in fact, England largely considered this Christmas-tide season as a whole. Father Christmas was sometimes be mentioned, sometimes not. There was no Santa Claus or St. Nick.
At Fiverr, we offer...
Fiverr.
I know.
Maybe one day
It's the
we'll
famous
get
song,
to...
Good King Wenceslas, written in the 19th century, that tells the story of a lord giving to the poor.
Sorry, did you say something, Trevor?
Huh?
Thought you said something, sorry.
Well, yeah, I was thinking maybe one day we'll be able to talk about one of those ads and annoy everybody with our faces and be like, you could buy this product.
Oh, yeah, if we have products of our own, we can do read-throughs. It'll be agonizing. It'll be great.
And then people will just skip around on our video.
Yep.
It's like when you watch some of the videos that have been on for a while, the most replayed parts are skipping their personal ads.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I understand doing read-throughs. Like, you got to make money. I think they're going on a little too long now. Like, you're getting into, 2 minutes. Like, just...
Yeah.
When I was in radio, it was 30 seconds to a minute. Those were the only two spots you had, and that forced people to be concise. I think people need to learn to be concise again. I mean,
Well, for some of those people, that one ad is paying for their entire video,
Yeah, so maybe that's what it is. They gotta
That's
make
their
it
entire
count.
that's their entire month, if you will.
Yeah.
Of living.
No, people got to make money. I understand that for sure, but I mean, good night. There's got to be balance, man. There's, you got to keep
Right.
what good is having an ad for 2 minutes if people aren't going to listen to it?
Yeah.
You need to be concise so people actually stay engaged, but that's a whole other conversation.
And
We'll get
being
there when we get
generous
there.
with the Christmas
Maybe,
spirit
hopefully.
during the Christmas time.
Almighty willing.
It's not Santa. It's about the generosity of spirit. The other feature of the English Christmas season in history is that it was a notoriously large party season. Remember what I said about Saturnalia and the time of misrule? Well, that does live on in English heritage. It was often a wild time, to say the least. In fact, one of the things you often hear is that Puritans, or sometimes the royal family, were anti-Christmas at times. Well, this is why. It wasn't that they didn't like the remembrance of the birth of Jesus. Christmas was in England a lot like Mardi Gras in America, let's put it that way. Which ironically is also a Catholic holiday that has turned into a bit of drunken debauchery. But that's another video. But those are the extreme stories, the time of misrule, the partying, the drunkenness during the English Christmas. At its best, English Christmas is known for the best of its parties, its food, and its focus on merrymaking throughout the country. But the focus is on Christmas spirit in general. More on that in a minute. The third and last one that I'll talk about is in the Netherlands. There, St. Nicholas is not only carried on after the Reformation, but the story of St. Nick is expanded and continues even to this day. And that link is important. For the Dutch, Nicholas is known as Sinterklaas, which is, of course, the origin of the phrase Santa Claus as you and I know it. He has several of the features that would later become Santa, but it's not quite as clear as you think it is. You see, in the Netherlands, during the time of the Renaissance and a little bit after, it was said that Santa Claus lived in Spain throughout the year preparing gifts. Now, Spain at the time owned the Netherlands, and so the connection there was very obvious to them. He was back at the homeland, making gifts, and he came once a year, again on December 6th, to check if the children had been good. And Santa Claus had an adopted orphan boy named Peter, who was a Moor from that time in Spanish history, before the Reconquista removed the Moorish presence as much as possible from Spain.
See, I was very baffled in the previous videos as to why we had the guy named Black Peter running around. I thought it was some... Yeah, I didn't know what in the world was going on with that. So, like, I thought it was some African-American version of the Apostles, and I was like, why? So, apparently it was because of Spain, and the Spains were largely populated by Moors at the time. So, there we go. A little bit of clarity on something that was very confusing to me earlier.
He's clarified.
Yes.
Spain. Santa Claus rode on a carriage drawn by horses, and he would, depending on the story, deposit gifts in wooden shoes in the windows, or young Pete himself would shimmy down the chimney to deliver the presents to the kids.
So Pete would do it. That makes more sense. He's smaller. Got it. All right.
Smaller and younger, yeah.
Okay. We're getting somewhere now. Got a little clarity. Great.
Now, this Dutch tradition, as you can tell, is the origins of a lot of what will become Santa Claus. But it's the same old tradition, only changed and altered just a bit. However, there are two things that we need to point out. In the original Dutch practice, Santa Claus remained a bishop, and he was there to see if the kids were naughty or nice. He is not a magical creature. He is still very much part of the clergy. But also, to this day, the practice of dressing up as Black Pete is deeply problematic. Another story told by the Dutch.
That was awkward. Those videos were very awkward. I'm just going to say that.
That was awkward. Still is awkward.
Is that Black Peter, or Black Pete as he is called, merely has soot on his face from climbing up and down the chimneys. That's not true, though. Historically, he was Moorish. He was of African descent. This story actually originally was more like Robin Hood, and if you're my age, you'll remember the best version of Robin Hood, which is the Kevin Costner version,
Lies.
where a man from the Crusades
Can't beat it.
has connected with a companion that is Moorish, and they travel together as allies. That was the original Santa Claus. Again, from the Renaissance, it was this idea that a wealthy person living in Spain with an orphan boy at his side would come and bestow benevolence upon the kids there in the
So
Netherlands.
he's like Batman.
Now,
only with
today,
gifts.
needless to say, there's a lot
Batman
of
and
controversy
Peter
about
instead
it.
of Batman and Robin.
So if you arrive at the 1800s, there really is no Santa Claus. The Dutch practice is, again, still largely Catholic, still focused on a man from Spain coming to weigh the good and the bad from kids. So where does Santa Claus come from? Well, the simple answer is he's invented in New York. St. Nick and Christmas presents and all of the lore, you might say, behind Santa Claus was invented almost entirely by a few men in New York in the 1800s. And I use the word invent purposefully, because while there are roots and hints of Santa Claus in Europe, as we've already seen, especially in the Netherlands, what happened in New York was, you might say, creating a folk history for the first time. The men involved were largely associated with the New York Historical Society. And if you remember your civics classes, New York was originally
I don't.
New Amsterdam, that's right. There was a long memory there, you see, of certain older traditions from the old world that the wealthy elites in New York felt were ripe for developing a new tradition in America. The society had Dutch roots, and they began to hold annual dinners on December 6th, there's that date again, to recall the original story of Santa Claus, now called St. Nick, minus the kid in blackface. And then, after some rumination on the themes of Christmas and St. Nick, two men in particular, though there are a few others.
On the OBS screen, we're blocking a name because our faces are a little too big. I'll have to fix that next time. But the guy's name is Washington Irving and Clement Clark Moore. Those are the guys he's talking about right now.
Should be credited for starting the ball rolling on modern Christmas. Washington Irving and Clement Clark Moore.
There you go.
Irving, of course, is famous for the stories of Rip Van Winkle and the legend of Sleepy Hollow. But he was a famous writer in his day, and he loved
That's very interesting. So the same guy who came up with Santa Claus is the same guy who came up with Sleepy Hollow. There's a brilliant thought in there somewhere, but I don't know what it is. Trevor, what do you think?
My brilliant thought is just hollow.
Just hollow.
Well, you said Sleepy Hollow.
Sleepy Hollow, yeah.
So that's my brilliant thought.
Oh,
Sleepy
okay.
Hollow.
All right, then.
Or just hollow.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is an interesting little factoid.
Dad to make up things in his histories that were entirely fictional. He seems to like to blend fact and fiction with abandon. Irving created a lot of legendary ideas that we still associate with New York to this day. For example, he came up with the name Knickerbockers to describe the New Yorkers. And he was the first to call New York Gotham.
Oh,
well,
there
in
you
his
go.
History of New York, Irving referenced Saint Nick or Santa.
Okay, there has to be a commonality there.
So
Gotham, Batman, Santa Claus. It's all from the same era.
That's crazy.
That's interesting. That's just fascinating. Okay.
Wait. So, who owns the rights to Batman?
Oh, I don't know. It wasn't Irving who wrote Batman. It was, what was his name? I think Bob Kane, I think. Somebody fact check me if I'm wrong. But I think it was Bob Kane. But still, you're talking about same kind of era in history. That's really interesting. So there's a historical, I don't know what you call it, commonality there. That's really fascinating. So next time somebody says Batman is Santa Claus, you can thank Washington Irving, as if anybody's ever said that. But anyway.
You said it just now.
Well, now it's on the internet, so it's for forever.
Yay!
Yeah.
Over 24 times. In Irving's work, he is still a bishop, and for most of the men in society, they kept that traditional Dutch theme. Only for Irving, Saint Nick was no longer the punisher. He was a jolly old man who loved to spread joy through gifts, and he was also now living in the North Pole. Can't have him coming back and forth from Spain. It was a lot more magical, you might say. But the real explosion of popularity about Santa came shortly thereafter from Clement Moore in his poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." Now, I will say here that there is some debate if Clement wrote the poem or if a man named Henry Livingston did. I won't go into that here, but there is a book that I've linked in the description of this video if you want to read more about it on Kindle.
So go to Ryna Reeves'
I'll
channel.
keep referring to the author of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" as Clement, for convenience though. But Clement was an independently wealthy man, also a part of this elite society, who taught Greek and other languages at General Theological Seminary. And he wrote this poem in the same tradition as Washington Irving and these other men who were discussing this folk story of St. Nick. The inspiration for his poem, it seems, was just simply his imagination. Clement, though, takes the tradition in an entirely new direction, and from this point on, Santa is becoming a real tradition in America. For one, St. Nick is no longer a clergy member. In fact, for Clement, he's not even human. He's a fat elf. Most people don't realize that when they read the poem. He's described as a jolly old elf. He rides on a sleigh drawn by tiny reindeer who each have names. That is also an invention of Clement. There is no Rudolph yet. Rudolph is invented later in the 20th century by a father whose wife was dying of cancer, but the others are there. And no, these reindeer are not Norse in origin. In fact, until this poem, there is zero affiliation with Santa and reindeer in European history. So here in the early 1800s in America, we have the full origination of Santa Claus. Based, to be sure, on older traditions, but frankly a new folk story created in the city of New York. Now, back overseas in Europe, in England, the story has developed during this century as well. This was the Victorian era, and Queen Victoria was the queen of doing things properly. and with a bit more, we might say, pomp and circumstance. Famously, the image of the royal family with a Christmas tree was famous, and suddenly Christmas trees became fashionable in England.
Well, there
And
you go.
that picture caught the eye of Sarah Josepha Hale, who I mentioned in my video on Thanksgiving. And in the 1850s, she published that picture in the Goodies Lady Book, and then added to that over the years all sorts of new traditions for decorating the home for Christmas. Now, it's the 1850s. We've not yet approached the wonders of exterior illumination, but it's coming. But, lo and behold, because of Queen Victoria's picture and the Goodies Lady Book, the Christmas tree in the 1850s became part of the American tradition. Likewise, the stories of Santa Claus and his reindeer found their way back over to England and eventually supplanted Father Christmas there as part of now a quintessentially British Christmas. So you have kind of a cross-fertilization. Ideas are moving from England back to America for Christmas, and America sent Santa back to the motherland. So to put it very simplistically, England creates the deeper themes of the Christmas spirit, of generosity, merriment, and the overall, you might say, aesthetic of Christmas that many Americans found appealing. And all of that without Santa. Just see Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol as a great example of this. Published only a decade or two after the New Yorkers started fiddling around with this idea of Santa Claus. Dickens' Christmas Carol is a story of a man, Scrooge, who has lost his sense of Christmas spirit and generosity. Visited by the spirit of Marley, who, by the way, vaguely is in the chains of purgatory or hell for his greed, though it's all given a very secular ring to it. And after Scrooge's visitation by the three ghosts of Christmas, he finally is brimming again with the joy of English generosity and the Christmas spirit. Notice, by the way, no Santa anywhere in sight. In America, though, the lore and the heritage of who Santa was began to grow. And over the rest of the 1800s, that tradition will go back to England and will become a part of British Christmas ever since.
Attention all internet users. Stop seeing ads for free.
Hang on a minute. Gotta mute it.
You could probably use that one.
Nah.
'Twas the night before Christmas, as
you
I
don't want
said,
pie?
describes
I don't want
Santa as an elf. And what happens over the 1800s is that Santa really has no set figure or look, you might say. He has no brand. He is tall sometimes, he is short, he's an elf, he's a human, he wears red, he wears green. It's kind of a cacophony of different ideas. But finally, in the 1930s,
There he is.
the iconic representation of Santa as we know it would not exist were it not for Coke and the work of Haddon Sundblom. By the way, if you want to see a legendary career in graphic design and art, just go Google Sundblom.
And that's where it all went to pot. But anyway.
Or
He
Coke.
literally did everything
Coke.
for the course of his career. He put the Quaker Oats man on the box. He created Aunt Jemima. He created all kinds of legendary brands. But he also gave Santa his final bona fide image. Sundblom gets rid of the fat elf imagery and instead makes him the jolly fat man with a white beard that we know and love. Rosy cheeks, twinkling eyes, sneaking in to eat a cookie, leaving gifts under the tree, that newly invented Christmas tree that was now a regular part of the American home. This was all invented in the 1930s. In other words, Santa, as you and I know it, is not even 100 years old. But after Sundblom, there's no going back. This is Santa, at least in the minds of most people who celebrate Christmas.
Well, there you have it, guys.
Holy moly.
Was your mind blown? I don't know.
I'm gonna go cry in a corner right now.
Did that disillusion you?
I'm gonna go behind my Christmas tree here and just cry.
You'd be like, you're back to that 8-year-old boy. You mean Santa's not real? Or however old you were when they finally told you.
I don't remember.
It's regression. It's regression. Oh, my goodness. Well, there you go, guys. that was the actual history of Santa Claus and Saint Nick. Now, I think that was a lot more concise than the 2 videos we watched prior.
Yeah, that definitely put the hammer on the nail, if you were.
Yeah, I like Ryna Reeves, man. He does a good job. So, if you want to watch this video for yourself and kind of see the other 2 videos that he has on the subject, go visit Ryna Reeves' channel. The video is the History of Santa Claus. So, there you go.
I like
There's
that.
your folklore, which was tainted with corporatism.
I'd like to know personally, like how because you hear a lot of people talk about, the pagans and the Celtics and whatnot, how all that ties into it. Or did he talk about it and I missed it?
I don't think he talked about it. But yeah, there's a bunch of basically integration of different cultures and beliefs and stuff over time. But so that's it. That's
Maybe
it.
we'll get into that later.
All right, well, we're going to wrap this one up. So, guys, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. We're wrapping it up.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Faith, Fiction, and Folklore. If you did, we would love it if you would subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Rumble. We can also be found on X, Instagram, and Facebook. And we are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Thank you again very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.